It was a discarded piece of laundry, nothing more. A bundle of teal fabric balled up and tossed into the thorny underbrush off County Road 42, just past the old Miller farm. To the hundreds of cars that passed it by on the morning of October 28, 2022, it was invisible, just another piece of roadside litter swallowed by the overgrown ditch. But to a jogger named Dave Hemlock, a man who ran the same 5-mile loop every single day, it was an anomaly. It was new, and it was stained with something dark. He stopped, his breath pluming in the crisp autumn air, and nudged the fabric with the toe of his running shoe. It unfurled slightly, revealing itself to be a set of medical scrubs. The dark stains were concentrated on the chest and shoulder, a deep, rusty red that had dried and flaked. It was blood. He knew it instantly, with a cold certainty that had nothing to do with the morning chill. This was not the aftermath of a deer strike or a minor accident. This was something terribly wrong. This is the story of a life stolen by meticulous deception, a heart preyed upon in its most vulnerable state. It is a story about the digital masks we wear and the monsters that hide behind them. This is the story of how a modern romance, born from algorithms and swipes, became a hunting ground for a methodical and remorseless predator, and how the discovery of a single piece of bloody clothing unraveled a web of evil that stretched across state lines, leaving a trail of shattered families in its wake. This is the shocking murder of Jessica Johnson. Jessica Johnson was 34 years old. She was a pediatric oncology nurse at Northwood Creek General Hospital, a profession that demanded a rare combination of clinical precision and profound empathy. She was, by all accounts, perfectly suited for it. Colleagues described her as a beacon of light in the hospital's most challenging ward. She had a knack for coaxing smiles from her small, frightened patients and a gentle strength that offered solace to their terrified parents. Jessica was born and raised in Northwood Creek, a quaint, picturesque town where everyone knew their neighbors, and major crime was something you only read about happening in distant, chaotic cities. She was the beloved daughter of Michael and Carol Johnson, a retired schoolteacher and a librarian who had instilled in her a deep love for community and a fundamental belief in the goodness of people. She had been an excellent student, a high school valedictorian who earned a full scholarship to the state nursing program. She returned to her hometown immediately after graduation, driven by a desire to give back to the community that had raised her. Her life was a tapestry of kindness, dedication, and quiet professionalism. She would never forget a patient's birthday. She would never miss a friend's call for help. She would never fail to leave a thermos of hot coffee on her parents' porch on cold winter mornings. But beneath this surface of cheerful competence, Jessica was carrying a quiet ache. A year prior, her 10-year marriage had ended. The divorce from her high school sweetheart, Mark, was amicable, a mutual recognition that they had grown into different people. There was no drama, no animosity, just a lingering, hollow sense of loneliness. She kept the small 2-bedroom house on Maple Avenue, a street lined with old oak trees and well-tended gardens, but the silence within its walls often felt deafening. Her friends, particularly her best friend since childhood, Sarah Jenkins, worried about her. They saw the faint shadows under her eyes, the slight hesitation in her usually bright smile. They encouraged her to get back out there, to reclaim her life, to find a happiness that was solely her own. It was this gentle push, combined with the profound isolation of a world still recalibrating after a global pandemic, that led Jessica to make a decision. She downloaded a dating app. It was Tinder, a platform she chose for its ubiquity and seeming simplicity. She was hesitant, feeling exposed and a little foolish as she uploaded a few carefully selected photos and wrote a brief, honest bio. Nurse, dog lover, optimist. looking for a genuine connection. For weeks, the experience was a predictable mix of awkward conversations and uninspired profiles. She was about to delete the app, resigning herself to a life of comfortable solitude, when a new profile appeared. His name was Marcus. The first point of contact was unremarkable, a simple, "Hello, Jessica." But his profile was anything but. Marcus Thorne, his profile stated, was 38 years old, an international logistics consultant who split his time between Europe and a home base in a nearby city. His photos were a curated collection of sophisticated adventures, standing before the Colosseum in Rome, smiling on a sailboat with a turquoise sea behind him, dressed in a sharp suit at what looked like a charity gala. He was handsome in a classic, understated way, dark hair, intelligent eyes, and a smile that seemed both confident and kind. His bio was a mirror of her own desires. He mentioned a love for quiet nights in, a passion for cooking, and a recent, painful divorce that had taught him the value of honesty and communication. He was, on paper, perfect. He was also a complete fabrication. The grooming process began almost immediately. It was a masterclass in systematic manipulation, executed with the practiced skill of a predator who had honed his craft over years of hunting. The first stage was love bombing. The communication was relentless, an overwhelming deluge of affection and attention. Jessica would wake up to a "Good morning, beautiful" text, a message that was not generic, but specifically referenced something she had mentioned the day before. Throughout her long shifts at the hospital, her phone would buzz with a steady stream of messages. "Thinking of you. Hope you're having a good day saving lives. Just saw something that made me think of your smile. Can't wait to hear your voice later." It was hundreds of messages a day, each one a small, carefully placed brick in the foundation of a false intimacy. He was building a world for the two of them, a digital bubble where she was the sole focus of his attention. The persona he crafted was perfectly tailored to her vulnerabilities. When she mentioned her love for Italian food, he sent her a photo of a pasta dish he claimed to have just made, complete with a detailed recipe. When she spoke of her dream to one day visit the Scottish Highlands, he told her he had spent a summer there and described the misty mornings with poetic detail. Every interest she had, he mirrored. Every value she held, he shared. He was constructing himself, piece by piece, into the man she had always dreamed of meeting. Then came the feigned vulnerability. About a week into their constant communication, he shared a fabricated, tragic backstory. He told her his previous marriage had ended because his wife had been unfaithful while he was on an extended business trip to Singapore. He described the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the deep loneliness that followed. He framed it as something he rarely talked about, a deep wound he was trusting only her with. This was a critical step. It elicited her sympathy, activating her natural instincts as a caregiver. It also created a false sense of trust. By baring his soul, he was inviting her to do the same. And she did. She told him about her own divorce, her fears, her hopes for the future. She was giving him the ammunition he would later use against her. The first major escalation, the transition from the digital to the tangible world, was planned for 2 weeks after their first message, the first date. He suggested they meet for coffee at the Daily Grind, a popular and very public cafe in the center of Northwood Creek. This was a deliberate choice. It was on her turf, in a place she would feel safe and in control. When Jessica walked in, she saw him sitting at a small table by the window. He looked exactly like his photos, perhaps even more handsome in person. He stood up, his smile warm and genuine, and gave her a light, respectful hug. For 2 hours, he was everything he had promised to be. He was charming, an attentive listener, and he made her laugh more than she had in years. He asked about her work, not in a superficial way, but with a genuine curiosity that made her feel seen and valued. He perfectly matched the online persona he had so carefully constructed. Jessica left the date feeling euphoric. The loneliness that had been her constant companion for a year felt like it was finally beginning to recede. She called Sarah Jenkins on her way home, her voice bubbling with an excitement her friend hadn't heard in a long time. "He's wonderful, Sarah," she said. "He's just perfect." But even in perfection, there were cracks, subtle inconsistencies, small, concerning behaviors that Jessica, caught in the glow of her newfound hope, chose to overlook. These were the red flags. The first was his aversion to spontaneous photos. During their second date, a walk through a local park, Jessica playfully tried to take a selfie of the two of them. He gently but firmly turned away, saying he hated having his picture taken. The excuse was plausible. Many people are camera shy. But it was delivered with a flicker of something cold in his eyes, a momentary loss of the charming facade that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Then came the issue of video calls. He claimed his work required him to travel frequently, often to places with poor internet connectivity. Whenever Jessica suggested a FaceTime or Skype call, he had a ready excuse. "The hotel Wi-Fi is terrible here in Brussels. My laptop camera is broken, and I haven't had time to get it fixed." Their communication remained limited to texts and voice calls, allowing him to maintain complete control over his visual identity. He gave vague answers to specific personal questions. When she asked about his family, he said they were estranged and it was too painful to talk about. When she asked for the name of the company he worked for, he gave a generic name, Global Vantage Logistics, that yielded no meaningful results in a Google search. He explained this away by saying it was a private European firm with a minimal online presence. Each red flag was dismissed. Jessica was deeply in the grip of confirmation bias. She had invested so much hope and emotion into the idea of Marcus that her brain actively worked to rationalize away any evidence that might contradict the perfect image he had presented. She wanted to believe in him. Her best friend Sarah was not so easily convinced. Sarah Jenkins was a high school history teacher, a pragmatist with a healthy dose of skepticism. A week after the first date, she sat with Jessica at their favorite wine bar, listening to her friend talk endlessly about Marcus. "It just feels a little too good to be true, Jess," Sarah said gently. "This guy who is a perfect match for you in every single way just happens to find you on Tinder." Jessica became defensive. "Why can't something just be good, Sarah? Why do you have to be so cynical?" "I'm not being cynical. I'm being cautious," Sarah countered. "Have you even seen his home? Met any of his friends? Does he have social media you can look at?" Jessica admitted that she hadn't. Marcus claimed he had deleted all his social media after his divorce to make a clean break. It was another plausible excuse, another perfectly constructed wall around his true identity. "Just be careful," Sarah warned, her voice laced with a concern that Jessica chose to interpret as jealousy. The conversation created a small rift between the two friends, and Jessica began to share less and less about her new relationship. She was retreating into the bubble Marcus had created for her. This was a calculated part of the predator's strategy: isolate the target from their support system. The final lure was set on the evening of October 27th, about 5 weeks after their first contact. Marcus had been texting her all day, telling her he had just returned from a grueling business trip to Frankfurt. He said he was exhausted, but couldn't bear the thought of not seeing her. He wrote, "I don't want to go out. I just want a quiet night. How about you come over to my place? I'll cook you that pasta dish I promised. We can just relax." This was the moment he had been building towards. He was persuading her to move from a public space to a private environment of his choosing, a place where he had absolute control. Jessica hesitated for only a moment. The warnings from Sarah echoed faintly in her mind, but they were drowned out by the intense desire to see him, to finally be welcomed into his personal space. It felt like the natural next step in their perfect romance. "I'd love that," she texted back. He sent her the address, 1148 Bridle Path Lane, in a city about 45 minutes away from Northwood Creek. She plugged it into her GPS. Before she left, she sent a quick text to Sarah, a small concession to the lingering voice of caution. "Heading over to Marcus's place for dinner. We'll text you when I'm heading home later tonight." It was a safety check-in, a promise she would never be able to keep. It was the last decision she would ever make. Jessica arrived at 1148 Bridle Path Lane just after 7 p.m. It was a nondescript, single-story house in a quiet suburban subdivision, the kind of place you would never look at twice. The lights were on, casting a warm, inviting glow. Marcus opened the door before she even knocked. He was smiling, dressed in casual clothes, and he pulled her into a long, warm embrace. The house was sparsely furnished, but immaculately clean. In the kitchen, a pot of water was boiling on the stove, and a bottle of red wine was open on the counter. It all seemed so normal, so domestic. He poured her a large glass of wine. "To us," he said, clinking his glass against hers. She took a deep drink, the rich liquid calming the last of her nerves. The wine tasted slightly bitter, but she dismissed it as a characteristic of the particular vintage. It was not. It was the taste of rohypnol, a potent sedative, dissolving into the Merlot. The trap was now sprung. They talked as he finished preparing the meal. He kept her glass full. Within 20 minutes, a subtle fog began to descend upon Jessica's mind. Her thoughts became slow, her limbs heavy. She felt a wave of dizziness and put a hand to her head. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, his voice still filled with concern. "I just feel a little strange," she slurred, her words thick in her mouth. And then the mask dropped. The warm, charming smile vanished from his face, replaced by an expression of cold, clinical observation. The kind, intelligent eyes she had fallen in love with were now flat, empty, and devoid of any emotion. It was like a switch had been flipped. The man she thought she knew was gone, and a terrifying stranger was standing in his place. Fear, sharp and icy, cut through the chemical haze. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. She was physically restrained, not by ropes or chains, but by the drug coursing through her bloodstream. What did you do?" she managed to whisper. He didn't answer. He simply watched her, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. It was the smile of a scientist observing a successful experiment. The crime was executed with a chilling, practiced efficiency. From the antagonist's perspective, this was not an act of passion or rage. It was a procedure. Once Jessica was fully incapacitated, slumped in the kitchen chair, he moved with methodical purpose. He turned off the stove. He poured the rest of the wine down the sink and washed both glasses, drying them and putting them away. He then carried her from the kitchen into a back bedroom, a room that was even more sparse than the rest of the house. It contained only a mattress on the floor and a single wooden chair. He laid her on the mattress. She was conscious, but unable to move or speak, a prisoner in her own body. Terror was screaming in her mind, but she could not make a sound. He sat on the chair and watched her for a long time, savoring the moment of absolute power and control. This was what he craved, not the connection, not the affection, but this, the complete and total subjugation of another human being. Then he moved to the mattress and knelt over her. He placed his hands around her throat. The cause of death would later be determined by the medical examiner as manual strangulation. It was a slow, deliberate, and horrifically intimate act of violence. After she was dead, his work continued with the same detached precision. He removed her clothing, folding the jeans and sweater neatly. He took her driver's license from her wallet and a small silver necklace from around her neck. These were his trophies. He placed them in a small wooden box that contained other licenses, other pieces of jewelry. He then dressed her body in a set of old medical scrubs he had acquired. This was a calculated act of misdirection, designed to confuse investigators should the body be found. He wrapped her body in a heavy-duty plastic tarp he had stored in the garage. Using a small dolly, he wheeled her body out to her own car, a 2018 silver Honda Civic, which was parked in his driveway. He placed her in the trunk. He took her phone and turned it off. He drove her car to a remote, pre-scouted location, a densely wooded area about 20 miles away. There, in a shallow grave he had dug days earlier, he buried her. He then drove her car to a long-term parking garage at the nearest major airport, a place where it might sit for weeks before being noticed. He wiped down the steering wheel, the door handles, every surface he might have touched. He took her purse and her phone with him, discarding them in separate dumpsters across the city on his way home. He returned to his house on Bridle Path Lane in a car he had parked nearby, his own vehicle, a dark green Ford Explorer. Back home, he took the scrubs he had removed from her body, the ones she had worn to his house, and drove in the opposite direction toward Northwood Creek. He tossed them into the ditch along County Road 42. It was another act of psychological warfare, a breadcrumb meant to send the police on a wild goose chase, to make them believe the crime had occurred closer to her home. By 3 a.m., he was back in his house. He showered, and then he slept soundly, without a trace of remorse or guilt. The entire operation, from her arrival to the final disposal of evidence, had been flawless. The alarm was being raised miles away. In Northwood Creek, Sarah Jenkins was growing increasingly anxious. It was now past midnight. Jessica's promised text message, heading home, had never arrived. This was not like her. Jessica was meticulously reliable. Sarah sent a text. "Hey, you on your way back yet?" No reply. She waited 15 minutes, her stomach twisting into a knot. She sent another. "Jess, everything okay? Getting worried." Silence. Finally, she tried to call. The call went straight to voicemail. Her phone was off. A wave of pure dread washed over Sarah. She knew, with an instinct that defied logic, that something was terribly wrong. She called Jessica's parents, Michael and Carol Johnson, waking them up. They too tried to call their daughter, with the same result. By 8 a.m. the next morning, with still no word from Jessica, Sarah Jenkins walked into the Northwood Creek Police Department. She was trembling, her face pale with fear and lack of sleep. She told the officer at the front desk that she needed to report her best friend missing. The initial police response was predictably skeptical. The desk sergeant, a man who had seen countless domestic disputes and weekend getaways, listened with a tired patience. "Ma'am," he said, "she's a 34-year-old woman. She went on a date. Maybe she just spent the night and her phone died. She's not technically missing for at least 24 hours. Sarah was insistent. "You don't understand," she pleaded. "This is not her. She would never, ever do this. She is a nurse. She was scheduled to work a shift at the hospital this morning. She didn't show up. She has never missed a shift in her life." The mention of a missed shift, a verifiable deviation from her established routine, was enough to elevate the concern. 2 uniformed officers were dispatched to perform a wellness check at Jessica's house on Maple Avenue. The scene they found was sterile and unnervingly normal. Her car was gone. The house was locked. Inside, everything was in its place. There were no signs of a struggle, no indication of foul play. It looked exactly like a house someone had just left, planning to return. The case was assigned to a detective. That detective was Frank Miller. Detective Miller was a 15-year veteran of the force. a man with tired eyes and an intuition that had been sharpened by a decade and a half of investigating the worst of human behavior. He had a reputation for being methodical, tenacious, and unwilling to close a file until he had an answer. He listened patiently as Sarah Jenkins told him everything she knew about Marcus. The name, the supposed profession, the story of the whirlwind online romance. Miller's instincts told him this was not a simple case of a woman choosing to be out of contact. The combination of the sudden, intense relationship with a man no one had ever met, the uncharacteristic missed shift at work, and the phone being abruptly turned off, created a pattern that felt ominous. He immediately recognized its potential severity. "We're not waiting 24 hours, Miller told his sergeant. "Let's treat this as suspicious from the jump." The first step was to follow the digital trail. Miller's team began with the basics. They needed to identify Marcus. Sarah provided them with the phone number he had used to communicate with Jessica. A quick search revealed it was a burner phone, a prepaid mobile number, registered to a fake name, and a non-existent address. It was a dead end. Next, they turned to the dating app. They sent an emergency data warrant to Tinder, requesting all information associated with the Marcus Thorne profile. The data came back within hours. The profile had been created using a disposable email address and was linked to the same burner phone number. The IP addresses used to log into the account were all masked, routed through various public Wi-Fi networks in the city where he lived. This was not an amateur. This person had a sophisticated understanding of operational security. The most damning discovery came from the profile photos. An analyst on Miller's team ran the handsome, smiling pictures of Marcus through a reverse image search. The results were immediate and chilling. The photos were stolen. They belonged to a German lifestyle blogger and model, a man who had no idea his image was being used to lure women in another country. The man Jessica Johnson had fallen in love with did not exist. The entire persona was a lie. The mask had finally dropped for the investigators, just as it had for Jessica in her final moments. The case was no longer a missing persons inquiry. It was the hunt for a phantom. Then, on the morning of October 28th, a call came in from dispatch. A jogger on County Road 42 had found a set of bloody scrubs. Detective Miller and a forensics team arrived at the scene within 30 minutes. The area was cordoned off. The scrubs were carefully collected and sent to the state crime lab for immediate analysis. Miller stood on the side of the road, looking at the spot where they were found. He knew this was a message. A killer this careful doesn't get sloppy by accident. This was a deliberate act, a piece of theater designed to manipulate and mislead. The lab results came back the next day. The blood on the scrubs was human. A DNA profile was extracted from the blood and compared to a sample obtained from a toothbrush in Jessica's bathroom. It was a perfect match. The blood was Jessica Johnson's. The discovery of the physical evidence confirmed their worst fears. This was now officially a homicide investigation. The news was delivered to Jessica's parents and to Sarah Jenkins by Detective Miller himself. The hope they had been clinging to was extinguished, replaced by a grief so profound it was a physical presence in the room. The investigation now escalated dramatically. Given the sophisticated digital evasion techniques and the possibility that the perpetrator was a repeat offender, Detective Miller made a call to the nearest field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The FBI's involvement brought a wealth of new resources. Their behavioral analysis unit in Quantico was given the case file. Within days, they had developed a detailed psychological profile of the unknown subject, or unsub. The profiler's report was terrifying in its clarity. The unsub was likely a white male, between 35 and 45 years old. He was highly intelligent, organized, and methodical. He was a textbook psychopath, possessing a narcissistic and antisocial personality. He would be superficially charming and socially adept, capable of mimicking human emotion without actually feeling any. His motivation was not sexual assault in the traditional sense, but rather the exercise of power, control, and domination. The report concluded with a chilling sentence. It is highly probable that this is not his first victim. Acting on this assessment, FBI analysts began cross-referencing the specifics of Jessica's case. The use of a dating app, the fabricated persona, the drugging, the disposal of the body, with cold cases from surrounding states. They were looking for a pattern. They found one. 2 other cases, one in a neighboring state from 2 years prior and another from 4 years ago, bore striking similarities. In both cases, a single woman in her 30s had vanished after starting an online relationship with a charming, handsome man who turned out to be a fiction. Both women's cars were later found abandoned at airport parking garages. Neither of their bodies had ever been recovered. The investigation had now revealed its true scope. They were not hunting a man who had killed once. They were hunting a serial killer. The pressure was immense. The media had picked up the story, and Jessica's face was on every news channel. The community of Northwood Creek was gripped by fear. For weeks, the investigation stalled. The killer had been too careful. The burner phone was a dead end. The fake profile was a ghost. The scrubs, while confirming the murder, offered no clues as to the killer's identity. Detective Miller and his team worked around the clock, re-interviewing everyone, re-examining every piece of data, searching for a crack in the killer's perfect facade. The breakthrough came from the most unlikely of sources. A local news station ran a segment on Jessica's disappearance, featuring an interview with a distraught Sarah Jenkins and a plea from Detective Miller for anyone who might have seen anything, no matter how insignificant, to come forward. A woman named Linda Gable was watching that news report in her living room, 40 miles away from Northwood Creek. She was a retired schoolteacher who had taken up marathon running in her late 60s. Her training route took her through the same remote, wooded area where Jessica's body had been secretly buried. She remembered something from the night of October 27th. She had been on a late-night training run wearing a headlamp. It was unusual to see anyone out there after dark, but that night, she had seen a vehicle parked on the shoulder of the road near a small access path into the woods. It was a dark green Ford Explorer, a newer model. What stuck in her memory was that it had a specific type of Yakima roof rack with ski attachments, which seemed odd for the season. She had thought it was strange, but dismissed it as a hunter or someone camping illegally. When she saw the news report, a cold dread washed over her. She called the tip line immediately. The tip was one of hundreds the police had received, but this one felt different to Miller. It was specific. It provided a make, a color, and a unique identifying feature. And the location was in a secluded area, a perfect place to dispose of a body. The painstaking follow-up began. Miller's team requested a list from the Department of Motor Vehicles of every registered dark green Ford Explorer, model years 2018 to 2022, in a 3-county radius. The list contained over 2,000 vehicles. It was a monumental task. They began cross-referencing the list with addresses, looking for single men who fit the age range from the FBI's profile. Simultaneously, another team was manually reviewing hours of traffic camera footage from roads leading to and from the wooded area on the night of the murder. After 3 days of tedious, eye-straining work, they found it. A traffic camera on a highway exit leading away from the wooded area had captured a dark green Ford Explorer with a Yakima roof rack at 2:15 a.m. on the morning of October 28th. The camera was just clear enough to capture the license plate number. The plate was run through the DMV database. It was registered to a 38-year-old man named Marcus Thorne. The address was 1148 Bridle Path Lane. The name sent a jolt through the entire investigative team. It was the same first name the killer had used. It was a classic act of narcissistic hubris, a killer hiding in plain sight, using a sliver of his true identity in his false persona. The suspect was named. They had him, but they needed more. A license plate and a hunch were not enough for a conviction. They began a frantic, covert background check on Marcus Thorne. He had no significant criminal record, just a couple of speeding tickets. He owned his home. He had a degree in computer science. On the surface, he was a normal, unremarkable citizen. But as they dug deeper, they found a record of a divorce from 5 years prior. Detective Miller knew this was their next crucial step. He drove to the home of the ex-wife, a woman named Emily Carter. Emily was hesitant to speak at first, clearly frightened. But as Miller gently explained that this was a homicide investigation, her resolve hardened. She invited him inside. The story she told was a chilling confirmation of the FBI's profile. She described a man who was charming and loving during their courtship, but who became a monster of control and psychological abuse after they were married. He monitored her emails, tracked her car, and isolated her from her friends and family. She said he had a hidden, dark side, an obsession with true crime and police procedure. He would spend hours studying cold cases, boasting about how he could commit the perfect crime and never be caught. The most damning piece of information she provided was about his behavior after she finally found the courage to leave him. He began to stalk her, not in a physically threatening way, but with a terrifying digital precision. He would create fake social media profiles to monitor her, and she once discovered he had put a GPS tracker on her car. She had filed a police report, but without concrete threats, there was little they could do. The ex-partner's corroboration was the final piece of the puzzle. The man Emily Carter described was the same man who had groomed and murdered Jessica Johnson. He was the chameleon predator, based on the vehicle identification, the suspect's name matching the alias, and the ex-wife's testimony. A judge signed a no-knock search warrant for 1148 Bridle Path Lane and an arrest warrant for Marcus Thorne. The takedown was planned for pre-dawn the next morning. At 5 a.m., a heavily armed SWAT team with Detective Miller and a contingent of FBI agents descended on the quiet suburban street. They used a battering ram to breach the front door, shouting, "Police! Search warrant!" They found Marcus Thorne in his bed, asleep. He did not resist. He did not seem surprised. As they put him in handcuffs, he was calm, almost serene. He was taken into custody without incident, his expression blank and unreadable. While the suspect was being transported to the station, the search of his lair began. What they found was more horrifying than they could have imagined. In his home office, they found a locked file cabinet. Inside were dozens of notebooks, filled with meticulous handwritten notes. He had been stalking women online for years. There were detailed dossiers on dozens of potential targets, including their routines, their vulnerabilities, and their families. Jessica Johnson's file was thick, chronicling every step of his grooming process. But the most sickening discovery was a small, locked wooden box on his bedroom dresser. When they forced it open, they found his trophy collection. Inside was Jessica Johnson's silver necklace and her driver's license. Alongside them were the driver's licenses of the 2 other missing women from the cold cases, along with a small gold ring and a single earring. It was the final, irrefutable proof. They had caught the serial killer. In a garbage can in the garage, forensics teams found a receipt from a hardware store, dated 2 days before Jessica's murder, for a shovel, heavy-duty plastic tarps, and rope. A definitive DNA match was found when a swab from the interior of Marcus's Ford Explorer matched Jessica's DNA profile. The evidence was overwhelming. Back at the interrogation room, Detective Miller and an FBI agent sat across from Marcus Thorne. For hours, he said nothing. He simply sat there, calm and detached, observing them with a chilling lack of concern. Miller tried every technique he knew, but Marcus was a wall of psychopathic indifference. Finally, the FBI agent changed tactics. He slid a file across the table. It contained crime scene photos of the trophy box and its contents. "We know about the others, Marcus," the agent said quietly. "We know about all of them." Marcus looked at the photos, and for the first time, his expression changed. A slow, proud smile spread across his face. His wall of silence crumbled, not with remorse, but with ego. He had been caught, yes, but he had also been recognized. His perfect crimes were finally being appreciated by a worthy audience. The confession that followed was long, detailed, and utterly emotionless. He spoke for 6 hours, providing a clinical, step-by-step account of the murders of Jessica Johnson and the 2 other women. He recounted the details with the pride of an artist describing his masterpiece. He showed no remorse, no guilt, no empathy. When Miller asked him why he did it, his answer was simple and psychopathic. "For the control," he said. "The power, to see if I could." He viewed his victims not as people, but as objects, pawns in the game he had created to prove his own superiority. The state had an ironclad case for the murder of Jessica Johnson, but the bodies of the other 2 victims, Kimberly Pace and Heather Williams, were still missing. Their families had been living in a state of agonizing uncertainty for years. The district attorney's office was facing a choice. They could go to trial on the Johnson case, a guaranteed conviction that would likely result in the death penalty, or they could make a deal. After consulting with the families of all 3 victims, they made a difficult decision. They offered Marcus Thorne a plea agreement. In exchange for pleading guilty to all 3 murders and revealing the locations of the other 2 bodies, the state would take the death penalty off the table. He would be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Marcus, a narcissist obsessed with his own survival, it was an easy choice. He agreed to the bargain. He wanted to live, to be able to read the books and watch the documentaries that would inevitably be made about him. Fame, even in infamy, was his ultimate goal. Over the next 2 days, an event both grim and necessary unfolded. Led by the killer himself, authorities began the process of bringing the victims home. Marcus, in shackles and surrounded by a heavily armed convoy, directed investigators to 2 remote, desolate locations in the neighboring state. Just as he had done with Jessica, he had buried Kimberly Pace and Heather Williams in pre-dug shallow graves in densely wooded areas. The recovery of their remains was a somber, heart-wrenching process. But for their families, it was the end of a long and torturous nightmare. They could finally lay their daughters to rest. The day of the sentencing was a moment of profound emotional catharsis. The courtroom was packed with the families and friends of the 3 victims, members of the community, and the press. Marcus Thorne stood before the judge, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, his expression as blank and indifferent as ever. One by one, the families of the victims were given the opportunity to read their victim impact statements directly to the killer. Michael Johnson, Jessica's father, stood tall, his voice shaking with a mixture of grief and rage. "You took our light," he said, staring directly at Marcus, "but you cannot extinguish it. Her memory will be a beacon of love and kindness, while you will be nothing but a footnote of evil, rotting in a concrete box." Sarah Jenkins spoke of the friend she had lost, her words a torrent of sorrow. "She would never hurt anyone. She spent her life healing people. And you are a void, a black hole of a human being. I want you to know, She was happy before she met you, and she deserved to live that happiness. The mother of Heather Williams spoke of the years of not knowing, the torture of false hope. The father of Kimberly Pace spoke of a daughter who would never get married, never have children, her future stolen by a monster she met online. Through it all, Marcus Thorne showed no reaction. He simply stared ahead, a statue of remorselessness. Finally, the presiding judge delivered his condemnation. His voice was cold with fury. "Mr. Thorne," the judge began, his eyes burning into the defendant, "you are a cancer on society. You have weaponized human connection, turned hope into a trap, and reveled in the destruction of lives. You are the very definition of a predator, and you have forfeited any right to walk among decent human beings ever again." The final sentence was delivered. For the murders of Jessica Johnson, Kimberly Pace, and Heather Williams, Marcus Thorne was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences in prison, without the possibility of parole. He was led from the courtroom in chains, his public life over forever. Justice had been served. In the weeks that followed, the community of Northwood Creek came together to mourn and to celebrate the life of Jessica Johnson. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people. The church was overflowing with colleagues from the hospital, former patients whose lives she had touched, and friends and neighbors who remembered her boundless kindness. They did not speak of the darkness of her death, but of the brightness of her life. But her family and friends were determined that her legacy would be more than just a memory. They wanted to create tangible change to prevent a similar tragedy from ever happening again. Led by Sarah Jenkins and Jessica's parents, they established the Jessica Foundation. Its mission was twofold: to provide support and resources for the families of victims of violent crime, and to advocate for greater safety and accountability on online dating platforms. Their work had a significant societal impact. The foundation lobbied state and federal lawmakers, and a year after the sentencing, a new piece of legislation was passed. It became known as Jessica's Law. The law mandated that all major dating platforms operating within the state implement a system of identity verification, making it more difficult for predators to create fake profiles using stolen photos and information. Several of the largest companies in the industry, under immense public pressure, voluntarily adopted these new safety features nationwide. The case received widespread media coverage. Documentaries and podcasts were produced, detailing the meticulous investigation and the chilling psychology of the killer. The story of Jessica Johnson became a national cautionary tale, raising public awareness about the dangers of online dating and the sophisticated methods used by modern predators. And what of the killer? Marcus Thorne was transferred to a supermax facility at Pelican Bay State Prison, a place designed to hold the most dangerous and incorrigible inmates. He lives his life in isolation, confined to a small concrete cell for 23 hours a day. He remains to this day an object of study for criminologists and psychologists, a perfect specimen of a psychopath. He has never expressed remorse. He spends his days reading and, according to prison officials, writing a lengthy memoir, still obsessed with his own notoriety, still convinced of his own superiority. He is unrepentant, a man who will die in a cage, remembered only for the lives he destroyed. This story began with a moment of vulnerability, with a good and kind person searching for connection in a world that can often feel isolating. Jessica Johnson's only crime was to be hopeful, to be trusting, and to believe in the possibility of love. Her trust was not a flaw, it was a virtue. It was exploited by a predator who possessed none. The lesson from this tragedy is not to fear connection, but to practice vigilance. It is a reminder that in the digital world, where identities can be crafted and facades can be perfected, it is crucial to verify, to question, and to listen to the warnings of those who care for us. Listen to the voice of the concerned friend. Pay attention to the red flags, no matter how small they seem. Trust your intuition when something feels too good to be true. The legacy of Jessica Johnson is not in the evil that took her life, but in the good that has been created in her name. It lives on in the law that bears her name, in the foundation that helps other families, and in the heightened awareness that has undoubtedly saved others from a similar fate. Her light was not extinguished. It was transformed into a beacon, a warning, and a powerful, enduring message of hope, caution, and the unbreakable strength of a community that refused to let her be forgotten.